With Overwatch 2 looking to shake things up, I'm hoping they look at further structural change to the game beyond just 5v5. Other complex games like MOBAs or card games have multiple formats to make sure that every type of player gets the experience they're looking for. In Overwatch though, we sort of just have Quick Play Plus, aka Ranked Mode, and Arcade modes, which did fine for Overwatch 1, but with Overwatch 2 making massive changes, overhauling the entire cast almost for 5v5, I think they're going to need to seriously look at formats to make sure we see the hero and strategy diversity that many of us fans love in play for Overwatch 2. We'll speak much deeper about this subject after a quick message from today's video sponsor.
When I looked under the Christmas tree this year, I didn't get what I asked Santa for. All I wanted was a competitive overhaul to Overwatch, and I didn't get it. Were you disappointed as well? Trade in that ugly sweater your aunt got you and get yourself something you actually need. Like today's video sponsor, Manscaped. If you haven't already joined the manscaping revolution, take our word for it. Our happy customers are happy customers. With the star of the show being the greatest of all time shaver for your sensitive areas, the Lawnmower 4.0. This bad boy has a long list of quality of life features. It's waterproof so you can use it in the shower, and it has an LED light when you turn it on so you can actually see what you're doing in the shower. All that's great, but really the killer feature is that white guard, the skin safe technology that makes it so easy to trim your hedges without accidentally cutting down the family tree. Also in the performance package that you need to get yourself is Ball Toner and Ball Reviver to up your freshness game an entire level. The Weed Whacker snips nose and ear hair like nothing. A few quick swipes and you're done, and it might result in a few extra swipes to the right, if you know what I mean. And it all comes in this quality carrying case they call the Shed, which will look great in your bathroom or when you're traveling abroad. Gotta take care of your body, fellas. Groom up, look good, feel good, pick yourself up a performance package today. Take our link in the description to head on over to manscaped.com/Overwatch and use our code Overwatch to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. Click our link and start manscaping today.
Formats are so important to games because they allow different groups of players to get exactly what they want from the game without having to change the core experience for everyone. Whether you're a casual for fun arcade or quick play player, or if you're a die-hard competitor, you should want the devs to take formats seriously because it means the part of the game you don't want to play can be kept separate from the one that you do. Overwatch 1, I don't think necessarily had this philosophy because they attempted to keep everyone happy at the same time, which I don't think works because, well, everyone has a different experience at their tier of play. Also, I think 5v5 presents some serious balance problems that I'm pretty confident that will make balancing Overwatch 2 far harder than Overwatch 1, which you might imagine there's no way they struggle to balance the second one more than the first one, but stick with me on this. If you've seen the pro playtests, which most of you probably have by now, the game looked quite straightforward. Fraggy, basically Call of Duty with Overwatch heroes. And that's the effect we should expect when you remove a tank from the mix, but also rework the game to bias towards being more of a shooter. And not just the heroes, the maps are designed to be more shooter arenas, and we're losing one of the pure team modes, Assault. So that means to me, if they didn't overhaul a lot of other things along with those already announced changes, I'm going to say that I think it's very likely that we see a balance chasm between viable characters. And the reasoning is kind of simple. Team comps are going to be far less varied when there's only one tank to structure how the team can take engagements, which really limits the reach of a lot of gimmicky type characters. Then on top of that, just the balancing in general is more fraggy or shooter focused, which I think is going to result in characters that are really good at dueling to be biased in a massive way unless they dramatically downshift their power. And even if they do, they might still set the meta, regardless of how dominant it is. If you'd followed Overwatch over the past 5 years, you kind of probably know what I'm saying already. A lot of times there's dominant picks in the Overwatch metagame that are dominant just based on their fitness, not necessarily their strength. And that's a very complex idea. It's kind of like survival of the fittest almost. Not the strongest survive, but the ones that fit in the environment the best. So regardless, if they tone back characters like Widowmaker or Tracer to try to compensate for the problem I'm talking about with balance tuning, I don't know if that's going to be enough. It may not just be their raw stats, but just their playstyle that fits in the game where it's more about jumping out of cover really quickly and banging out a headshot. And that means characters that aren't really focused on dueling either have to be reworked to try to be, sort of like they already tipped their hand with the Sombra reworks, which turned out to be massively overpowered in pros' hands. Not a great sign when the devs seem surprised that that's the case. And I think they'll be surprised by a lot more things like that if they don't really take the reins of this early on and start to let format handle this problem that I'm describing in terms of the fitness for the new metagame, so that we get to see variety of heroes, especially at different tiers of play, and we can try to retain some of that personality that doesn't look like it's there yet in Overwatch 2. That's why you see viral clips of saying it's just the same game, but maybe simpler. It looks a lot similar to problems that Blizzard tried to address with really powerful tanks and supports over the years in order to curb us away from the dive meta that was so prominent early on in competitive Overwatch's history. There was a long era where Tracer was like the god queen of the universe, and nothing could stop her until Brigitte instantly stopped her and then retired her for a year or two until Brig got reworked for 222 to kind of enable Tracer as opposed to just hard counter her. Situations like that, I think we can expect with 5v5, with the game being less complex, for that to be a bigger problem. Oh, and by the way, there's a host of other problems with just the current format, even in 6v6, that I think could be addressed with some format upgrades. I'll just rattle off a few ideas to remind you why our current format isn't great. So what is our current format? I'm going to call it the quick play format. Or if we were to look to MOBA games, for example, we might call it all pick, where there's no restrictions on what characters you pick because it's a casual mode. You should freely be able to pick whatever you want and have fun, regardless if you win or lose. That's how quick play should kind of feel. You want to win, but as long as you try, get in there and have fun. Shouldn't be anything wrong with that. However, I think there's a bit of a problem when that quick play format rule set is applied towards the competitive side of the game as well, for both ranked mode, but also team-based modes, whether that's the Overwatch League or upcoming team modes that I am basically demanding they put into the game at some point in Overwatch 2. Because those are so widely different in how you play them, I want to emphasize that I don't think the casual mode should go away. I just want there to be an added layer of complexity on the competitive modes so that the casual and competitive sides don't have to feel like they are at odds, which is basically what we've had for the past couple years, where they're trying to make the higher tier balance state very diverse, but when you're balancing towards experts at the game, then you get certain heroes like Brigitte who are incredibly lopsided in their performance. I think the high-level community does itself a disservice when they just pick a flavor of the month hero to blame for all the problems. Meanwhile, they beg for hit scans to have their range pulled in, for dominant ranged heroes like Widowmaker to get nerfed, and you do all those things, then all of a sudden the game is closer range, and they're wondering why mid-range dominant characters like Zen Brig are so strong. It's like, well, something's going to be strong with our format, right? No matter what. Problems like that are just going to be worse in Overwatch 2 unless Blizzard gets ahead of it. Okay, I know this has been a lot of setup in this video. I will get to my proposed changes in a moment, but quickly getting through some of the other problems with our current format. Because it is a casual format, you have problems like when you play a round of attacking an objective or control. Think of like a hybrid map where you have 4 minutes in order to unlock the point to basically feel like you're getting some momentum on the map. That's not a long time to figure out what you should be doing in order to counter the enemy's defense. And what ends up happening a lot is that teams will come out on a suboptimal comp, get rolled in the first fight, then be forced with an impossible snowball decision where the enemy not only has the map, has the ground, has the setup that you have to crack, they now have ultimates. And if you swap your comp, assuming that you can create a better one, you have to sacrifice ults to do so. It's been suggested that it might help if there is some conversion ratio where you get to keep some of your ult charge when you swap, but even if they do that, I still think it's just generally a massive disadvantage to swap when you're thinking about the ideal play of the game. And it's that principle alone that makes it really punishing to ever draw outside the lines of the meta, because whatever is deemed meta enough to be reliable in most situations gets a disproportionate amount of playtime in our current format, which is why the casual quick play, all pick or free pick type format where you're allowed to swap heroes whenever you want doesn't really work, because realistically what it translates to be is, rather than the dream of swapping to counteract the enemy, what it really means is that you have the freedom to swap to the most optimal thing all the time. And that's what you should be running 99% of the time. And it's really punishing to not do that. And as I said, with Overwatch 2 being a simpler game, I think that principle of obviously seeing what the clear answer is going to be more punishing than even in Overwatch 1. Now, to get into my proposed competitive format idea, and it's really more of an idea set, I'm going to kind of unfold this idea bit by bit, because it's less important that the whole idea gets accepted, but instead we start to see the strengths of changing the format. Simply put, I think in the top tier competitive version of the game, for diehards like myself and for pros, it would be helpful to have a hero draft before a map so that it's clear and obvious to both teams ahead of time what heroes are in play. It's a way to diversify what picks get seen from map to map, but it also counteracts any balance problems because it's a forced way to mix up the roster. Also, it adds interesting strategical complexity when you have two teams that know each other's strengths and weaknesses, and makes the game less about solving the perfect meta of the all pick or free pick format that we have now, which is to say, what is the most ideal comp and the strongest comp we can make with all the heroes. Then you have more interesting conversations and decisions to make with how do we make an ideal roster out of that, slicing off a section of the game just for this map, for our team, for this given matchup. There adds those multiple layers, right? It's like a stabilizing force that no matter how the game is designed, balanced, or whatever they mess up, you can always try to thin out the characters, and we're not trying to build to play with the most broken stuff possible. If you play Magic the Gathering, this is simple to you, okay? If any of you have a legacy deck, it doesn't make sense to play your legacy deck up against a standard deck. There's rules for this. We live in a society. And if you don't understand the analogy, with Overwatch, there's always going to be combos that are clearly uber powerful. Having Tracer and Sombra on the same team feels like having two Tracers. Very powerful, high-tier competitive DPS duo. And one that I'm kind of afraid might take over the early version of Overwatch 2 that we might be seeing in April. But if there is a bit of downtime before players play the map to draft out picks, you can start getting into the tier 2 and tier 3 picks of the game to add some variety, as opposed to being forced to playing the S tier picks all the time. Now let's go one step deeper to the foundation of our expectations of the free pick format, where the dream, and I think this does work casually, but the dream is if the enemy has a team comp that's giving you problems, you can always swap up your strategy in order to find something better. That's the dream that was sold to a casual player base. But we know, having properly learned how the competitive game really functions, that that's not how it ever plays out. It takes about a minute and a half to get a full team fight going for ultimates, which is usually the best way to crack a point. Which means if you have to swap and lose a fight guaranteed to the enemy already having their ult bank, you really only get like 2-ish stabs at that on an attack. Which means if you swap twice, you probably lost, and the second one might just be like a panic swap as you rush to the point to try to clutch it in the end. Realistically, competitive Overwatch isn't about swapping, even though you're allowed to do it. But I think we can retain some of the principle of that in my proposed draft mode if you were allowed to draft a roster of heroes as opposed to just one per player. I think a lot of people assume when you talk about pick, ban, draft mode that it just means you're locked in on a character. I don't think it needs to be that. Remember, Overwatch has 32 characters right now. It was kind of teased or pseudo-announced by IGN a long time ago that Overwatch 2 would bring along, I believe, 6 new heroes. Between that and a regular cadence of hero releases once we're in Overwatch 2, before you know it, we're gonna blink and we're gonna have 40 heroes. 40 heroes? That's getting to be like an unmanageable number in terms of how much complexity that can be tossed in your face at any given point, right? Another aspect about the free pick being kind of like not competitive to me is how easy it is for the enemy to swap into some wacky strategy that you just didn't see coming in time and you lose just because of it. Now that might feel good from the person doing it, swapping to Bastion on point C in a last-ditch attempt to save the point. Okay, maybe that feels good to do, but I don't think people really like forgetting that Doomfist is a selectable character and then being insta-punished by a Doomfist swap out of spawn as they're trying to capture the objective. There's a lot of like lame surprise mechanics based on those hero swaps that are less strategical and just a bit more of a gotcha. I think if you were to draft a roster of characters for your team to use on a given map, you could slice out maybe like 10 or 12 characters that you're going to be locked into for the team on that map. And when you can see what the enemy is picking ahead of time, you kind of have a better grip of what characters are going to be in play in the first fight, in the stall fights, what options do they have on the table in order to switch. They can still do that fun Overwatch, switch your strategy type stuff, but you're limited in a smaller section of the game as opposed to it all being available all the time. And by the way, expecting there to be like 40 odd characters in the game and they all somehow be balanced is just a ridiculous idea that is just never gonna happen. Whereas when you start to take like slices out of the game, well, you can start to allow heroes to be the best versions of themselves, as opposed to what we get in Overwatch 1 oftentimes is that characters aren't really allowed to thrive because of the fitness problem, right? Like if a character is too fit into the game, they got to be like toned down to severe levels of boredom just because they like interact with too many things at once or just too good at being a good Overwatch teammate. And often that makes them less fun to play, as opposed to in a draft type scenario, you can allow the heroes like that to be key and pivotal because the player base can decide, well, that Reinhardt pick or that Widowmaker pick is of really high value in the draft. So we have to prioritize and work our way around that as we pick and ban or whatever it is. I've been kind of loose on those terminologies of how that should happen because I'm just open to it. And I'm more so trying to get you guys to like see the benefits of trying the game this way. Keeping in mind, don't think it has to be in the casual modes. And I think it gets just better when you start to think of this in a competitive series type format with predetermined teams. As we start to talk about hero drafts and who's allowed to pick and ban, who's the captain, whatever, I think a lot of that gets solved when you know that this is aimed for a team mode. So that means if you've got internal struggles in your team, well, you need to find better friends. And what's even more exciting is that when you're going up against an enemy team, you get an opportunity to feel out what their specific strengths and weaknesses are. So now you're not just looking at the hero roster in terms of, do I hate playing up against characters like Bastion, Doomfist, whatever. Then you can start to think about, well, what's a strategy that we think we can pull off better than them, especially when you're losing on a map and going on to another map in a series. That is really exciting Overwatch. The Overwatch game type is kind of intended to be like a one-off quick map, easy to get into, and that's great for casual play. But competitively speaking, in order to make that make sense, you kind of need to be able to adapt over multiple maps to really prove your Overwatch skill and what I value a little bit more, your Overwatch IQ. I think the biggest gains in flexing your ability in the game is your adaptation to when a strategy beats you. But in the ranked environment, because everything is just a one-off and you don't like your team, you avoid them, you get a whole another mixed roll of one tricks on your team, on the enemy team. It's just sort of like a bit random and not reliable, and you don't have to confront strategies directly. So one of the biggest criticisms of any kind of pick, ban, or draft type mode is that, well, Frito, if you acknowledge that certain meta picks in the game are going to be ban meta, essentially, whether it be Widowmaker, Tracer, or whatever, what happens when we get ourselves into what Jeff Kaplan was really worried about, a ban meta? Well, I don't think it would be unreasonable to have a rule set in a series where you can't pick or ban out the same characters multiple maps in a row. Like they're removed off the table for the next map. Remember, we've got 40 characters here. We have to ask ourselves a question. Do we want to just see the optimal Overwatch 2 Call of Duty style meta go at each other all the time? Because if you want that, then I think you're going to see a lot of Sombra Tracer for like a year, which is why I think forcing the format to incentivize you to switch up your strategies map to map is pretty key for Overwatch, unless we're just gonna always have a singular meta forever be mirrored. That word mirror is very important to me as well. I haven't mentioned this thus far because it's not a deal breaker for me, but I also would love to see it be the case that this hero draft, if it were possible, and I think when you have around 40 hit characters, it might be, if it were possible that we send Overwatch into an exclusive pick format, which means you can't mirror pick. A lot of pro level players have pushed back on my opinion on this really hard for Overwatch, because when you get yourself on a map like Ilios Ruins and let's say Widowmaker's meta and you don't have your own, well, you just cannot fight the Widowmaker just based on the map design alone. It feels like an insurmountable task because she has so much cover, great sight lines. Getting to her is just an impossibility because the team's in the way and you can't dive 3 times to get all the way in the back to get her. She's just gonna get headshots on you and the game's gonna be really hard for you. But even with that being the case, where there can be situations where if you can't mirror pick something, you just straight up lose in the hero draft stage, I think pros deserve to feel that. Am I spiteful? Maybe. Maybe I'm just a rank scrandy. I get kind of sick and tired of pro players who have the benefit of playing in full teams all the time where everyone's trying to win complain about, wow, it really sucks having a team comp that just can't beat the enemy's team comp. We know that's the casual player's ranked experience every single day. So I don't shed a tear over hearing a pro player have to figure out how to do some insurmountable task to overcome a massive challenge like a normal ranked player has to at every level of play. Some key characters to point out like this: the average plat experience has a lot of wrecking balls and Genjis and players that just love some of these characters but have no idea how to play them. And when you're up against a more reliable team comp, some of these picks can feel like they're just way too heavy on the team if they're not being piloted appropriately. So I'm sorry, pro players, but when I hear that complaint, I think the high level community would do itself a big service to realize that a move like that brings the casual game closer to the pro format and makes it more relatable, not less. In reality, a normal casual player, or even, somewhat competitive one like myself, has severe limitations on the characters they even can learn. There's just too many that it's almost like just a scheduling difference, right? Where players that don't have the time to dedicate to the whole game and max out the whole game, well, yeah, the free pick format works for them because they're limited. But for players that are higher in their investment level and grind the game, well, they break that concept because they will just simply learn whatever's more optimal, regardless if it's outside of their skill set. So putting limitations on that brings it closer to what a normal player experiences and makes the higher level gameplay more relatable, not less. And I think that's really important for a competitive game to hold interest in the community for years on end. Now, other downsides of a potential draft mode is that it adds downtime in between games, but that's why I think it should be dedicated to the top hardcore mode in the game, either the tournament mode, integrating it with game battles, whatever. If you're expecting to have to play a series of maps for a round of a tournament, I think the added time to strategize and think about what you need to be doing is warranted because you're going to need to be doing that anyway in order to play with your team. I'm also interested in if this could be workable into ranked queue for solo and mixed queue for the quick play plus mode, but I'm not sure I find it necessary there. Having talked to the Blizzard developers, one thing that they eventually always swayed me on is that a big number of players really appreciate how easy it is to get back into the quick play plus ranked mode, and they don't want it to feel like they have to study more of the game to get something out of it. But at the same time, I think allowing that kind of attitude means that ranked is always going to be doomed to just have a very casual feel, and you kind of just have to take the losses that you're bound to get, just like it's quick play, and just try your best, I guess. There's ways that you can try to make this fair, although it is difficult to make a draft fully fair based on the seeding of the teams. Maybe the higher tier seed can pick if they want to have first pick or to defer, because typically this is done in what's called like a snake draft, where the first team gets 1 pick, but then the second team gets 2 picks. So you might not be able to get the best hero, but you get the next 2. So it tries to balance that out a bit. And I haven't even mentioned the word hero bans yet, because I don't want to make that the forefront of this conversation anymore. The community really got lost in the weeds with the whole hero ban idea with Blizzard's proposed hero pools, which was a travesty, an abomination, a Frankenstein monster of an idea that was in no way what anyone that I know of was asking for. That's not what we want. We want the players to be in control, to have some influencing voice against the meta. So there's cute things that we could consider adding in, especially when this is played in a series where maybe the team that lost the first map gets a hero ban. So they can't just keep getting railroaded by the same strategy over and over and over again. On one hand, I do hear the argument that people want to see players on their key roles and their best heroes. But if we only allow the meta to decide what that is, it's complete chance whether your role is even viable. Whereas with a format like this, you can get a bit of players selecting the heroes they want, but then also have a way to force them onto their next pick, to vary it up. How deep is your mastery of the game? Because the thing that I really don't like about competitive Overwatch is that it feels like the victor often is just the person who lucked out in the meta the best. And I know this personally as a ranked player, where if heroes I'm good at are overtuned, then I just get up to top 500. And I'm like, oh, I must be a really good player. And once in a while, a pro team maybe is the benefactor of one of their specialist characters being overtuned. And that doesn't feel rewarding if that's what determines what wins, and it does in Overwatch so much. Especially when we see these balance patches that the community demands come, and I understand why they want that, but it often makes or breaks careers. It like cripples teams that were amazing on one patch, then right before the tournament, the patch comes in and they get bounced out and don't have a chance because they weren't as good at the next meta. And it makes players very confused on where they stand in the pecking order of the game, no matter what tier you play at. And again, not a problem in casual modes that aren't aimed to be taken too seriously, but when Blizzard pretends like the ranked mode is a path to pro, I think there needs to be a way to make playing the game feel more straightforward towards a broader version of the game, as opposed to incentivizing getting a lucky roll on the balance patch for that season. In conclusion, I think some variety of draft mode for heroes is going to be required for high-level competitive Overwatch, because I want to see variety of gameplay and it not be down to balance to just shift up what is the top picks over and over again. I think that would be a terrible strategy for Overwatch 2 because it wasn't like spectacularly successful in Overwatch 1, but furthermore, I just think the biases in the game are just going to make that work even less. It would really suck if we figured out that like Diva is the only flexible enough tank and that's like the only tank you ever see for like a year, right? Remember the fitness argument. It might not even matter if Reinhardt has 5 fire strikes, if like you just need to be able to quickly get between cover and in and out of a fight. The metagame in Overwatch often does calculate to give us those types of results, where it's not always the characters that stand out the most, but the ones that fit in. And that's a really boring way to establish metas, in my opinion. Whereas if we allow the format to do some lifting for us, rather than expecting balance to, well, then players would have the opportunity to craft their own strategies. And you don't have to do the boring hold tab in spawn to see what the enemy has. You get that done ahead of time before the game clock is ticking down with some time to think about it. And you can see, oh, they have a Doomfist player. He's a specialist at that. How are we going to pick characters that can counteract that? As opposed to, I think, what ends up happening in reality in Overwatch 1, where players just kind of leave spawn on characters they like. You roll out a spawn with Soldier, Zen, Ana, vaguely walking to a choke, and then surprise, a Doomfist is in your backline and you just get one hit for 4 minutes and don't have a chance to play the game. Had no idea that that was what you're going to fight up against. You weren't aware of that when you hit Q, but before you know it, that's in your face, and you essentially just lose based on the matchup. Like, I think people get really afraid of draft mode because they don't want to create matchups that they auto lose. But I think what they forget is that in Overwatch, that happens all the time now. Okay, it's always happening. That's just the way the characters interact in this game. So it's better to have a bit of lead up time to prepare yourself for that, to know what the strategies in play for a given map are going to be. So then at least you can think, okay, should I path to the point or to the high ground, to the wide off flank? You actually have some information to know which direction you should go, how you should set up. It's so much more empowering than the blind pick, free pick format, which sort of just incentivizes you to, hey, just get in there and have fun. Well, it's a lot of fun when your comp beats the enemies, not so fun when you're surprised when it's the other way around. Everybody, that's it for today's video talking about my suggested new competitive format, draft mode. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I'm sure this could be a lot more advanced in the ins and outs of the rules, but I just really wanted to lay out the problems that are at stake here, and hopefully Blizzard can give this attention as we roll into Overwatch 2, coming soon TM. I don't feel this subject gets nearly enough attention, and I hope the community can start to take this seriously and realize that a lot of the problems they have with the game, they blame on balance, but really it's the format that makes it be a constant problem. Be sure to check out our link in the description to pick yourself up a Manscaped performance package today. Click our link and use our promo code OVERWATCH to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping. We love Manscaped on this channel, not just us who run it, but many of you have let us know that you've joined the Manscaped bandwagon and are really happy, which makes me happy. It's the gift that keeps on giving. If you want to upgrade your package's performance, then pick yourself up a performance package with the Lawnmower 4.0, the Weed Whacker, ball deodorant, and the rest of it. Take our link in the description. It's been fun talking to you guys about Overwatch this year. Hopefully 2022 is better. Be sure to click subscribe and the bell icon to check out our upcoming content on Overwatch. It's going to be getting good. Have a happy new year. Be safe, everybody. I'll talk to you guys next year.